Okay, so to continue on with what His Holiness was saying about the Madhyamaka verses. Okay, so there were the two. That which is dependent arising is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. There does not exist anything that is not dependently arisen. Therefore, there does not exist anything that is not empty. And so he said, when we're doing deity yoga or guru yoga, at the part where you dissolve into emptiness before you self-generate as the deity, to meditate on these two verses, okay, and to really try and understand emptiness. And he was saying too, when we walk around and when we're doing different activities, there's another verse to meditate on, and that's also in Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle way. It's chapter 22, the first verse, and it says, neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. The aggregates are not in him, nor is he in the aggregates. The Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. What is the Tathagata? And so that verse is a reasoning also leading us to understand emptiness, where we're examining the relationship between the person and the aggregates. So in this case, it's the Tathagata as the person. And I think Nagarjuna chose the Tathagata as the center of this chapter for a reason, because if we're going to concretize anything as an inherently existent person, we'll do it to the Buddha. Okay, and showing that in the same case as with the Buddha, in the same case, it's the same with us, that the self, the person, is neither inherently the same as the aggregates, inherently different from the aggregates. The aggregates are not inherently in the person, or the person is not inherently in the aggregates, and the person doesn't inherently possess the aggregates. And so those 5 ways, when you examine, then, because if the person were inherently existent, it would have to exist in one of those 5 ways. So you examine, how the person exists, and we conclude that it doesn't exist in any of those 5 ways. And so therefore it can't be inherently existent. Okay? So what we're negating there is the inherent existence of the person, not the existence of the person. Okay? But we're examining how does the person exist, and it's not in any of those ways. When we look at those 5 ways, they can actually be subsumed into 2, that the person and the aggregates are not inherently the same, and they're not inherently different. So when Chandrakirti, in addition to these 5, adds 2 more, that the person isn't inherently the collection of the aggregates, and isn't inherently the arrangement or shape of the aggregates, all those 2 can be condensed into either it's not inherently the same or not inherently different. Okay, so they just broaden it out from 2 to 5 or to 7 to give us different aspects and ways to look and examine and check up the relationship between the person and the aggregates. Okay, so in the meditation on emptiness, we are not looking and seeking to find the inherently existent self. This is a misconception. What we're doing is examining how does the self exist, and if it were inherently existent, it would have to exist in one of these ways. Okay? So, he says to contemplate ourselves as the practitioner, that we don't exist inherently, but just by mere designation. Now that's quite the opposite way that we feel. When somebody says our name, here I am, there's this I, that comes up. Yeah, and we may not notice it during the day just because we're so used to it, but sometimes when your mind gets really quiet and then you hear your name, you see this like, oh, yeah. Like there's something real there. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, but to really examine that and see that there's nothing really there, that the self of the person exists by being merely designated. Okay? So the mere designation does not make it something true and real. Yeah? So we don't say the self is non-existent, and we don't say the self is truly existent. It exists by mere designation. Okay? But when you search to find that self, that person, you can't find anything. Okay? So that's why his concluding thing was, what is the Tathagata? Who am I? Yeah, I think I'm this, but when I really search to try and find who I think I am, I can't find anything. But I say I'm walking, I'm eating, I'm sleeping, I'm thinking. So who is this person who's doing all those things? Yeah, and so in that way we see the person's empty of inherent existence, but exists by dependent designation. Okay? So we exist by merely in name. So in the Prasangika system, when they say that things are mere names, yeah, it doesn't mean that, I am just a name, or the table is just a name. So I'm putting the paper on a name, okay? Or I'm clicking, I'm speaking into a name. Yeah, that the microphone's a name. I'm speaking into a name. It doesn't mean that. When it says that things are mere name, it means they exist by being merely designated, by being merely named. Okay, independence on name and concept. Yeah, because names themselves are words or sounds. So we're not saying everything is a sound. That's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? Okay, so His Holiness always says there's either two ways things can exist. They either inherently exist, or they exist dependently, by dependent designation. There's only those two choices. And if you think inherent existence means it exists independent of every single other factor, cause, conditions, parts, in relationships to other things, the name, the mind, the names, inherent existence means it exists totally independent of any of those things. Yeah. So if you can't find a self that exists in that way, if no such person exists inherently, the only other way a person could exist is dependently. Okay? And we know that we exist because people are doing things and so on. So realizing emptiness does not mean that everything ceases to exist. I mean, even the Buddha used the term I. He said, I'm walking and I'm doing this and I see that, and here's a chair, and, well, maybe for Buddha he said, here's a mat. I don't know how many chairs they had. Here's the grass, here's my alms bowl. So, things exist, but the idea behind realizing emptiness is they don't exist in the way that we grasp them to exist, or the way that they appear to exist to our sense consciousnesses. That the very appearance to our sense consciousnesses is erroneous, or is mistaken. I should say mistaken, not erroneous. Is mistaken, because they appear to be out there, objective, independent, self-enclosed entities, but they aren't. So when we refute that they exist that way, the only other way they can exist is by dependence, and specifically dependent designation. Okay, because if they were independent of everything, then they would also be independent of names and concepts. But when you examine, you see things aren't independent of those things. Yeah, so then things have to exist dependently. So His Holiness says you come to that conclusion by default. Okay, simply because inherent existence is impossible. Yeah. So if you have two choices, and there's no other alternative, and it's not one, it's got to be the other. Okay? So let's stop here for today, and then I'll continue tomorrow with how to use it in our deity yoga and Guru yoga.